Hello. Last time I talked about the great conversation, which might be the goal of university education. There is, however, one problem with all kinds of discourses about what we want students to learn, what we want to happen with the students at the university, because we cannot really make sure that whatever students study at the university actually stays with them for any considerable length of time. There is actually a very funny TED talk, TEDx talk to be precise, by a memory professor who speaks about meeting his favorite student 5 years, I think, or 10 years, several years after his graduation. And he says, "Oh, hello, professor, it was such a great professor, you had such a great class with you." And he makes a mistake that professors should never make. He actually asks them, "And what do you remember about the class that you took with me?" And he said, "Well, it was about memory." And he said, "And?" And said, "Well, it was about memory and stuff, something like memory, you know." So that's pretty much nothing that the student actually remembers from the course. So if this course is about great conversation, well, the next question is, okay, it was a course about Plato. We read some Plato. What was that about? It was about some Plato. You know, Plato was kind of cool. What was that? Well, I don't really remember. And this is, I think, very typical. This is not a kind of aberration, or this is not some peculiarity of a particular student. If I look at my own education, for example, which I received, undergraduate education at St. Petersburg State University, there are 60 courses which I took while I was a student there. There's a long list of 60 courses. When I look at the titles of these courses, most of them, I think I can say pretty much the same as that student to that memory professor. Yeah, it was discussed about historical grammar of Russian language. And what was that about? Well, it was about historical grammar, like language developed. This is pretty much it. So it's amazing how little I remember from my university education. I would say from the 60 courses, maybe there are 10 courses of which I can actually say, well, this is the course where I actually learned something that I used after that I can still remember, that is still part of my intellectual baggage, so to speak. Why that happens? I mean, is this inevitable? Is this just because this is the way our memory works? And that's what actually professors of memory studies, so psychologists actually tell us. They say, well, this is the learning curve. You learn something, you get to the pinnacle of your knowledge and skills and what you learn before the end of the course, by the time of the final exam or final paper or whatever it is. And after that, you forget very fast. You forget actually much faster than you learn. And that's everywhere. I mean, there is a famous story about, it was, I think, Harvard or Stanford professor of physics who made another mistake. He actually tested his students a year after they took a course with him on physics. And he discovered that they remember less than 5%. These were kind of top students in top university. So it's not just knowledge, right? I mean, they forgot the skills that they taught them. They kind of has ways to solve particular equations and do some kind of problems that they could solve at the end of the course, and they couldn't solve them 1 year later. Of course, memory studies gives us some hope by telling us that, well, you know what, you can actually improve the retention of knowledge by various things. For example, active learning helps. If you learn actively, you remember longer, you forget more slowly. If you mix things with different things together, right? I mean, you put a particular subject matter, particular course material in association with other courses, then it kind of stays longer in your memory. Revisiting the material several times also helps. But it doesn't help all the way, right? I mean, you just don't forget like this and maybe forget like that, but you still forget. Why is that? I mean, why some courses we do remember and some courses really make a difference and others, and the majority of them, don't? When I look at this list of 60 courses which I took at St. Petersburg State University, Department of Philology, Faculty of Philology, I can say, well, one of the reasons why most of these courses didn't leave a dent on my mind is because I didn't choose them. I didn't like them. I didn't want to take them. I just had to take them because I had no choice. I mean, it was an educational pipeline, and I wanted to study Russian literature. I was really inspired by a particular professor who I heard back when I was in high school. I actually studied with this professor. This professor actually taught me a lot of things. But as a student in that program, I had to take lots of linguistics courses, like historical grammar of Russian language, which I mentioned, or lexicology, or Old Slavonic, and all these things I didn't like. So that's why I didn't learn, right? I mean, you can say, well, this is the remedy. You should allow students to choose what they're really interested in, and then these courses will be worthwhile. But it's not a total solution, right? Because among the courses which I took, there were courses which I selected or which I liked when I was taking them, and they still didn't leave a dent. I mean, still don't remember many of them. It's definitely true that if you give more choice to students, the students will learn better, but they are not going to learn in such a way that all the courses they take, if they want to take them, if they chose them, will actually work for them just fine. When I try to analyze which courses I do remember, there is a clear answer to that. These are the courses, most of these courses are courses which I actually used after that. So I finished the course, but then I took another course that made use of the previous course. Then I wrote my coursework, my diploma, later my dissertation, using all these things. So if I use something for my own research, for my own kind of studies, then it actually stayed with me. If I didn't use that, it most often didn't stay with me. So that would be a solution that would say that, well, if you design a curriculum, you should really design a very narrow curriculum, not just a major, not specialность, because my specialность was Russian language and literature. Of that, all this huge thing, only the small little thing, which I actually do remember, which I really did study. So you should really narrow down the major and make all the courses in that major. That really undermines the whole idea of the breadth of learning of the great conversation, because great conversation is about talking across different disciplines. There is maybe a way to salvage the idea of breadth of broad education by saying that, well, why don't we require all students to take two majors in very different fields, or major and minor, for example, right? And then they will actually remember things that they learn because they take a lot of courses in these two directions, and they also have a certain idea of breadth and disciplinary variety. But that's still kind of implies that it makes no sense to allow a student or make a student take an isolated course in philosophy or in, I don't know, sociology, because they will not get anything from that long term. The objection to this design has to do with how people form the intellectual agenda. So coming back to my own example, I came to philology faculty of St. Petersburg State because I wanted to study literature, right? But I didn't know exactly what kind of literature I wanted to study. I mean, it was Russian literature, but I mean, what part of Russian literary tradition and from what angle, right? As it turned out, I was much more interested in literary theory than particularly literary history. And I also got interested in some parts of general linguistics, which is not part of historical grammar of Russian language. It was a separate kind of study course, set of courses that I really took something from. And I also did some philosophy. I couldn't take courses in philosophy in that educational design, so I had to learn something by myself. But anyways, I mean, nobody who would be designing a curriculum would think that, well, this is a kind of a scope that you should plan for some guy called Andrey Shcherbenok, so why don't we actually have this mini major and require him to only take courses within that mini major, because it's unique. It's unique for everybody. You cannot predict what's going to click. And then the explanation of taking so many redundant courses that don't leave a dent is that you have to do that in order to find your own thing. You have to do lots of courses that you are not going to use before you find the right course. And finally, there is an argument that might actually help us salvage the idea of random courses that students forget pretty soon. And the argument is that our memory works more complicated way than I just described. It's you forget the course material, but you still remember something. There is actually proof that if you have to learn something for the second time, something you've already forgotten, you actually learn much faster. So it means that something stays in your brain. So what if what stays in our brain is not the course material, which we can test easily, but some kind of way of thinking? So let's say you took a class in history, you forgot everything about this class pretty soon, but you developed critical or historical thinking, right? And this historical thinking actually stays with you for a long time, and you can use it later on. If that is true, okay, that it means that we have to test students differently. We don't have to test them so much about the course material, which we currently do. You have to test them about the, let's say, historical thinking that they developed. How to do that is a separate question. And finally, you can actually relax, right? You can say, well, whatever. I mean, people forget many things. That doesn't make these things valueless for them. For example, we've seen, all of us, thousands of movies in our lifetime. We probably remember very few of them. Most of them we totally forget, but we don't think that, well, we wasted our time. We shouldn't have, spent time or spend the money for the movie ticket, because we enjoyed the process. We just enjoyed watching these films, even though it didn't leave much trace in our memory. So maybe it's the same for university education. You just enjoy the process and you don't care so much that many of these courses will go into the drain. So these are the options, right? So I think that it would be cool if we could discuss that. So either we have to reduce drastically the number of courses and try to tailor it in such a way that students really concentrate early on and really develop the intellectual agenda and only take courses in that intellectual agenda, because that's something that will bring out. Or we should really develop a different type of testing that actually tests what students learn, which they are not going to forget after they've taken the course. Or we can just relax and say that, well, there is no problem actually here. Students take courses, some of them work, some of them don't work, but as long as they enjoy the process. But I don't know how to measure that enjoyment, of course. That's fine. So if you can comment on any of these ideas or proposing other solution to the problem of forgetting in the discussion board below this YouTube video, will be cool. Thank you very much for attention.